Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 130. What can Nicolas Cage teach us about identifying malicious activity? So, Nicolas Cage, never heard of him. You've probably never seen a movie, or probably never been outside for the last 50 years. Nicolas Cage is one of the most prolific actors in all of film history. The man has over 119 acting credits under his belt that he's actually named under. Probably more than that. He has been involved in a lot of film and acting, and he's just the most prolific actor you probably have ever known. He's done movies all the way from movies like Face Off, The Rock, Con Air, Kick-Ass. Man, he's also done Spider-Man Noir, Ghost Rider, Wicker Man. He's done animated films, The Ant Bully. He's also done horror films such as, The Wicker Man was one of them. Renfield, I guess you could consider a horror film. He's done serious films like Pig. His first film, The Best of Times, or he's done comedic films, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It goes on and on. He's been in just about every fucking movie you could think of, and done every type of part that you can imagine. And he has not just necessarily done that. He's also the man's owned castles. He's owned a couple of castles, one in Germany, one in England. He owned his own island at one point. The man has lived a life. He is a crazy story, and has done just an absolute gobsmack amount of work in acting and film, and continues to do so, which is kind of crazy. And one of the things that there's a significant argument about with Nicolas Cage is he a good actor? Yeah, he has all of these films, but is that just because he'll take any work? Is he a good actor? And, if you're a heathen and you say no, I guess you could make that argument. He does seem to have a cut and dry sort of personality when he's in certain movies. I mean, I certainly wouldn't put him up there with a lot of other actors for his acting chops in something like Renfield, or I don't know. Gosh, there's a lot of other movies, but Deadfall, that's one. But he also has some really good ones. One of the best films, and arguably one of the best films ever made, is Adaptation, and it was phenomenal in that. And there's a ton of other movies that are just absolutely fantastic that he has been a part of. Con Air being another one, and The Rock. Those are two iconic action movies that are just, they might not be essentially amazing acting jobs, but they are good movies that have that if by any stretch of or by any measure did well. They had a bunch of really good ideas, and they brought in a bunch of money, and so by measure of bringing in cash flow, yeah, he does that. He does really good with that. Anyway, whole point being is that Nicolas Cage has a lot of movies, and whether they're good or bad, it can be up to the eye of the beholder. But you can also measure some of that. You can measure it by what impact they had, how they were received. I would argue that some of his films have petered out as far as they never warranted a follow up or a sequel. Man was going to be Superman at one point, so there's something about that. Anyway, what does this have to do with identifying malicious traffic or activity. And well, that's I'm not just trying to gloss over or gloss Nicolas Cage here. The whole point with identifying malicious traffic or malicious activity in an environment is that um, there's a lot of activity. Like if you are looking at activity within your environment, either through a SIM or through some other sort of aggregation system, it can be really difficult to identify any malicious activity that is in there because all activity from a sort of static perspective is just activity. Whether it's malicious or not, it's really difficult to just identify it based on characteristics of, oh, this is traffic, or, we have this person is doing this thing. It's almost impossible for you to identify malicious traffic just by those specific strategic properties. So we have to identify malicious traffic or malicious activity through other means. And generally, this is a very interesting methodology or interesting implementation of how SOARs and SIMs and other contextual identifiers work within your organization. And I think I've brought this up in the past, and I hate it because it's a marketing term, but it does warrant it. It is a thing that does warrant a different name, and that's a SAM. A SAM is what we're calling a security automation mesh or security analytics mesh. And what this is it's a methodology of analyzing activity based on unique characteristics in the context of the data, and bringing out an evaluation of the traffic in real time to identify that which is malicious, anomalous, or abnormal to the activity of a user in that specific instance. So that's a very fancy way of basically saying we're doing just a shit ton of math with everything that somebody does. So to kind of design this system and understand how it works and understanding how we can identify a good actor versus a bad actor by just looking at the traffic, we have to think about a lot of different things. So one of the things that we have to identify when we're doing something like security analytics mesh, or just trying to identify malicious activity by hand, is we have to look at all of the activity that a user normally does. Now, with classic EDR systems or other malicious detection systems, there's a lot of behavioral analytics that does go into that, but it's typically always done at the process level or at the machine level, and that can be very useful to do. So say for instance, if you have a system level process that's never been run before, suddenly running scripts out of the command line or something like that, that's a really good identifier that something different is going on. Yeah, and that can be very, very easy to do. However, that's not a guarantee. That's not a guarantee that a malicious actor is in your activity, because think about what a malicious actor can do. One of the biggest targets that a malicious actor has is grabbing data. And if you're a user, say for instance you're a banking organization or a financial organization, and you have a bunch of accounting or financial experts doing work within your organization, it's going to look like normal activity for them to open up documents and download them and process them. Yeah, that's going to look pretty normal. So how does an EDR stop that? Like, how can it? Because its job is to identify it when it's really abnormal for it to be doing that data, and understand when that's occurring. And so that's kind of a gap. And honestly, it's not the EDR's responsibility to stop benign activity like opening up and viewing of documents. That's not an EDR's job. So how do we do this without the markers that normal malicious activity can have? Again, how can we tell if one of Nicolas Cage's movies is bad? Because conceivably they all do pretty well, or well enough so that he keeps acting. So how can we say that any of them are actually bad? Well, more of that it deals more with going in and understanding how many pieces of identifiable information there are within every action that a user takes. So we don't just look at you can't just look at the information of what is this user doing, because obviously if a user is doing something that they would normally do, it can be it can be normal activity. It can be something that they're already doing. It can be their job. So we don't want to just flag everything that a user does. That's a lot of noise. It's useless. Breaks down the system. So what else? How else do we do this? Well, we also have to look at the time of the activity. When does the user normally work? When is their work normally done? Do they work every hour of every day? Nope, they definitely don't. Do they operate at specific times? Yeah, they probably do. They probably work within an 8-hour window, if that. How often? What's their cadence? What's their average throughput of file operations? Things like that. And that'll help us build sort of a dossier of a user to then be able to come up with a framework for how that user behaves. It becomes sort of an idea of, okay, this user is operating in this manner. And so we can identify exactly what makes this normal activity versus what makes this malicious activity. So then how do we go to the next step? And because that can't just be it, because what if somebody is, they've got a deadline, and so they've got to work a little bit longer, or they have to work remote and they're working on the other side of the planet this week. These are all considerations that we have to have and sort of functions that we have to look at. And so then we also have to look at, the context of everything that the user is doing and the statistics around that. Because if the user suddenly doubles up on their activity, that's something concerning. They might be using an AI agent, shadow AI, but that could be allowed, but conceivably it could also be a problem. And so we need to put these considerations in place and potentially mark these as malicious, or mark them as potentially malicious to review for later. So what else do we do? How do we take this from an organization or from a single user perspective and identifying potentially malicious traffic and aggregating it across the entirety of their behavior dossier? Well, first, after we've created this dossier and we identify that the traffic, their normal behavior patterns, and we attempt to identify how they're operating within the organization, we then have to look at exactly what they're looking at, and even so far as to how they're looking at it. So it's not just, okay, this person is opening up documents. They're not just operating within this website. It's, what do they open up this document with? What application are they using? Are they using Word normally? Do they normally use Word? Do they use OpenOffice? What are the processes that they normally access within that? If they suddenly start using Python and they've never used it before, that's a pretty good sign that that's a malicious activity. However, if they suddenly switch to a new browser, such as, they use Firefox and all of a sudden they start using a Chromium browser, that's a pretty good sign that there might be something different going on. They could have just changed, but hey, a change is a change. We need to identify that sort of information. And so not only do we have to identify that piece, but we also have to identify, well, where are they accessing it from? What systems? Is it a trusted system? Is it an untrusted system? Is it an IP address range that they normally come from? Are they suddenly operating from a server that they've never operated from? So on and so forth. So we can identify these markers and add them as pieces to the dossier to then continue to identify down the range what sort of activity marks this as a normal user and normal behavior. And so that by itself still won't do it, because again, it's very difficult to say whether Nicolas Cage is a good actor, because Gone in 60 Seconds was an amazing film that did very well at the box office. But I wouldn't say it's great, and I wouldn't say anybody who acted in it is fantastic. It was fun. It was worth watching, once, but it wasn't adaptation. But uh, when you're looking at whether or not activity is malicious, you also have to draw on additional pieces of information. And this is where the security analytics mesh process or feature set or methodology is going to really shine and provide you with enriched data. And that is the calculation of how the behaviors really come together. And that is, so we have these pieces of information. What the security analytics mesh is going to do is say we've got 30 different markers in place. And of those 30 markers, we have 5 of them which flag as potentially malicious. And so the security analytics mesh is basically going to take those pieces of information and kind of combine them into a score sheet, a heat sheet, if you will, and identify them as potentially malicious based on the characteristics where they're lining up with something that may be potentially malicious, and providing a score to then evaluate as confidence in malicious activity. And so we think of this as basically it's essentially just a dumbass math equation. Really, that's all it is. If A plus B plus C plus D plus E equals 70 or is greater than 70, malicious. That's basically how it's going to work. But we do this in such a way, we craft it in such a way that the activity identifies and helps provide itself with the information. But really where the key and the goal of the security analytics mesh is to pull the data. And when you have something that reaches say, for instance, we get to a point where it's like, this could be malicious. What we do with that data then we pull a greater subset of the user context. So we start small and we look at that. We say, this could be malicious. We say, okay, well, we're not quite sure yet. So we're going to pull a bigger swath of data. And then we look at that greater swath of data and compare the current data that we're looking at with that greater swath. And if we get a little bit higher of a malicious rating, say, maybe we should just look at a little bit more data. And if we get even more of a malicious, or if we get a higher malicious rating, then we look even further out. And eventually what we'll come up to is a number that either it stayed static at a certain percent, and that we can submit that finding, that potentially malicious activity, as at a static confidence score, or we can say, hey, this has breached the point where we know this is malicious, where we know this is a good movie. Leaving Las Vegas was a good movie. And we know that for a lot of reasons, but it was one where Nicolas Cage won an Oscar. Or, Academy Award, Oscar, right? I don't know. Fuck it. Doesn't matter. The whole point being is that we know that Nicolas Cage was a good actor in Leaving Las Vegas. And when we pull out this information, when we eventually see this information in the greater context of the user activity, we can identify the amount of we can identify the amount of confidence in malicious activity for that specific action, those specific actions that the user has taken, and then provide that to the security analyst, the SOC team, or whatever, to then dive in deeper to investigate or remediate, depending on what is going on with the user. Sometimes you'll end up with a user who may have just changed some of their behavior. They may have decided, I wanted to change up my browser. I have a buddy who decides that all of a sudden he's going to start doing things differently. Why? Just because he felt like it. He doesn't really have a reason. He just wanted to start doing things differently. And I got to tell you, as a security practitioner, it drives me fucking crazy because I need you to be consistent. Be consistent, goddammit. Stop changing how you're doing things just because you felt like it. Anyway, the whole point being here that with consistency, with the understanding that users can operate in specific ways and how users operate in their normal behavior patterns will help provide that baseline for the security analytics mesh to then be able to start providing a confidence score against the activity that is happening on a system. And when things start going awry and away from that, we can identify that traffic as either malicious or as benign. Now, it's not foolproof. And I'm going to be the first to say that nothing in security is foolproof because there are a shit ton of fools out there who all they do is try to fool these systems. All they do is try to make sure that these systems are, all they do is try to get around these systems. And so attackers have just as many resources as normal behavior or normal users. They have just as many resources, if not more, than security practitioners. They definitely have more time than security practitioners. Again, malicious actors have 24 hours in a day, whereas security practitioners really only have 8, if they've got any work-life balance. So it's a challenge, and it can be difficult. But with these tools that we put in place, with the security analytics mesh, with the contextual identification of behaviors and activity, we can attempt to reduce the wonder and, I guess, unknown of traffic identification and really be able to identify if Nicolas Cage is a good actor. And, for me, Lord of War is possibly one of the best movies ever made. Just from a perspective of it's a good story. It's based on a true story. It's got impact. It's got a significant amount of drama, and it's still very much a true story today. Like it resonates throughout the history of the world because it really did happen. Like a lot of this shit did happen in Lord of War. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I don't know. I might be a sucker for it, but also Jared Leto dies in it, so that helps. Anyway, all that being said, if you're still not convinced that Nicolas Cage is a good actor, or at least has decent acting chops, then maybe you need to do a little bit more contextual investigation and actually watch some of his movies. That's all I got time for today, guys. Hope you all have a great day.